Hello. Hey, hi.
Hello, hi.
Okay, yeah, sorry about the delay there. A little internet connectivity problem.
That's
Can you
fine.
can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Cool, cool. Well, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed.
Yes,
Great. Well, your interview with Caleb Maupin was really interesting. I think you've had two interviews with him, and I was really intrigued. So you are first. My name is Kate Fry, and the channel is We Are Many, They Are Few. And to everyone who's watching, if you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. Okay, we have Dust James, and you are a Marxist-Leninist truck driver.
correct.
Okay, great. Now, how did you become politically aware? If you're willing to share that.
Sure. Let's see. I come from a family of humble means. We were essentially economic refugees, and we came down from upstate New York and basically northern Appalachia, south central in the hills,
Okay.
around Ithaca area, and we moved down to North Carolina. I was like 5, grew up here. I was always in the anti-war. Um, when I was 18, well, in high school, I did counter recruitment to the military. Um, I refused to say the Star Spangled Banner. Um, and right after I graduated, I did an internship with the American Friends Service Committee, making counter recruitment or truth in recruitment material. Um, I later found a Marxist-Leninist group that was underground, and I was trained in Marxist-Leninism. I've been involved in the immigrants' rights struggle, anti-war movement, um, and then I dropped out of school. Been driving trucks like 8 years, and I've been getting back into it, and I've joined the Center for Political Innovation. I also have a YouTube show where I host a video blog called Anti-Imperialist America, as well as a co-hosted show with a comrade who is a union organizer in Australia. And we do that bi-weekly now as well. And I also run a number of Facebook pages and community groups trying to get people linked to each other, working class coalition chat groups as well.
Okay. Okay. Sounds like a pretty full activist leftist resume. Pretty good background. Yeah, what I like about Caleb Maupin, and as I understand the Center for Political Innovation, they're not afraid to go to the masses to actually try to talk to working class people. So much of the left, what I know, especially the Facebook left or whatever that is, does not seem to wonder there are so many purity tests. Like what startled me, I think you said on Facebook that you're a Jimmy Dore fan. I enjoy watching him too. There seems to be a lot of hostility on much of the left towards Jimmy Dore, and I can't for the life of me really figure out why that is. Like he's not a big theory guy, yeah, okay, but I mean, I think he's one of the best assets the left has right at this moment, which isn't saying a lot, but he is. So I can't really figure that out. There's so many purity tests, or so many people are afraid. I think Trump did a lot of damage both to liberals and especially to the more radical left. Like Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing, I think. So I don't know. I wonder if you had any thoughts on this.
Sure. I've had my own journey as well. I think coming from an anti-revisionist training, we're very principled. But sometimes, if you're very principled, can become isolated
Right.
from the masses. And I think the way to reach the masses is through class struggle and class appeals.
Right.
But Caleb has this very good theory called the synthetic left, or movementism, as it's broadly known in Marxist-Leninist circles, is people are so attached to the protest arena, and there's massive billions of dollars of NGO money that usually gets people in those circles, and all the Marxist groups cater to these circles,
Right.
and all those people are manipulated by democratic money. So you have this force of people who are trying to take the mandate of the left, progress, anti-imperialism, class struggle, and they're more in favor of wars. They tail the sheepdog imperialist, AOC and the rest of them,
Right.
and I'm sick of it. I'm from a humble background. I see my tradition as, I was trained by people who came out of the tradition of the communists, who organized the first interracial unions in the South and actually built working class power.
Right.
And I think the socialists, the so-called the new left in the 1960s, which did great work with the anti-war movement, never really had the connection with the masses like the old 1940s style left did. And I see as conditions worsen now, and people become aware of what's going on. It's like this group that calls itself the left is so far tailing the Democrats and all their special causes that they can't even see people awakening the class struggle underneath their nose. And I think Jimmy Dore is a great example of him. He's never been a strict Marxist-Leninist. At one point, he was backing Bernie Sanders, who I've considered to be an imperialist sheepdog from his inception, from the time he became more popular on the popular stage, and even before that, voting for imperialist wars and supporting the system, and so Jimmy Dore gets a lot of things right than the so-called left doesn't. He was right about the truckers. He's right about medical care. He's right about calling out the sheepdogs. He's anti-war as well. He's a great asset to the growing organic left in this country. Things are getting worse. People are seeing it. People are ready for alternatives and answers.
Right.
And I think we need principled working class Marxism, Leninism. I have my faults with the People's Party and other groups, and I have my issues with Dore as well. But we're trying to mobilize the masses of people, and popular progressive figures that are left of the imperialist sheepdogs are definitely allies in that struggle.
Right. That's definitely. Yeah, Dore he had illusions in Bernie. He had illusions in Tulsi Gabbard. But over the past 2 years, to his credit, he seems to have radicalized. And I love his like raw working class anger at the Democratic Party, at the sheepdogs. He calls out like nobody. And I believe someone from the CPI called out AOC recently when she was in Texas, stumping for some Democrat, like she voted absent for the funding for Iron Dome. I love the way he did it. Everybody else like, what? You're not supposed to do that. But I love the way that guy called out AOC. That was great. AOC is really tanking. I love to see it. She's a dangerous person. With AOC, do you think she's a plant, or do you think she's sold out, or do you think she's kind of part of this artificially created synthetic left? What do you think's going on with her?
Well, I'm not going to question someone's personal intentions.
Sure.
But I do believe if we don't have a mass working class movement similar to the Communist Party of the 1940s that has real say and has real power in the political process, anybody who goes to Washington is going to, favor the powers that keep them in that position. And that is if it's not directly the corporate interest groups, it is the parties that are controlled by those interests.
Right, sure. Right. So, what type now? You have criticisms of the People's Party. I've been following it somewhat with Nick Brana. I have some issues with it as well. What would be your main criticism of the People's Party? What would be your take on it?
I think I have been a supporter of the Green Party for a while now, and that has been the biggest party that was left of the Democrats and correctly called out the Democrats. Now they have their issues, and I say, might as well say we have had issues expanding the people, although I'm not sure if I consider myself a part of that anymore. They've had issues with reaching out to the people.
Mhm.
I think the People's Party in particular is still hooked into a social democrat mindset.
Mhm.
Um, they're not pushing, like the Center for Political Innovation, which I do consider myself a part of, has a 4-point plan. And that 4-point plan, if we are able to get it into action, it would require a complete change of power. It includes nationalizing the banks and the oil companies.
Mhm.
And I think that is key because that's the source of the problems, the wars, the military industrial complex, issues with drugs, the underfunding of all these of our educational and health services. It all goes back to the power of the monopoly capitalists and the banks.
Right.
And we have to build popular coalitions against them. Now, I honestly think without that rearrangement of power, and this empire's need to hang medical care and education over our heads to fill this massive military, to go and destroy banks, I mean, to go and destroy countries on behalf of the banks that control the government. I think maybe they're still a little naive about the political process. But I think they're going in the right direction. I would love it if the People's Party would adopt some of the Center for Political Innovation's platforms. That would be great. Um,
Right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, I question electoralism. The People's Party seems almost exclusively oriented towards electoralism, and they won't, in this situation, it won't get very far. I mean, the ruling class controls the media. They spend a huge amount of money building creating these media narratives. I don't, electoralism, even a best third party, won't get very far. What do you say that something like a general strike or organized labor action could really take the system down more than voting at this stage?
right now, I think people, right now, we've had an economic revolution. Economics have changed crazily.
Mhm.
Um, People are underemployed. New technologies has this huge gig sector that's even further um, abused and exploited, and people are looking for another system.
Right.
And with McCarthyism, the destruction of a mass working class communist movement, there's not a lot to look for.
Yeah.
And so I think right now we need to change the culture and put out ideology. And that's what the Center for Political Innovation does. It's promoting Marxist scientific socialism in a way that the broad masses can understand to empower them. And then I think if we build community organizations where we figure out the news and what's going on ourselves and don't allow the corporate media to lie to us, then we can better make decisions. So we need independent infrastructure, both journalistically, community organizations, to be able to break the people, keep the people, and maintain the people outside the dominance of the monopoly capitalists.
Right, right, makes sense. I think there's a need to build alternate media. It's very difficult to do, but there's that need. And there are things like Rockfin or other platforms. YouTube censorship is getting insane. So anyway, the Center for Political Innovation, is it a political party or what is it exactly? I mean, I've heard of it.
It's a think tank.
Okay, okay.
That's what people, I mean, that's what big money uses to get a few people with a few resources to get ideas out there to the broader masses.
Okay.
So we're doing a similar strategy, only for and of the people and not the monopoly capitalist corporations.
Okay. So do you so it's not like not organized. You don't have like democratic centralism or organized like a political.
It is not a democratic centralist organization.
Okay.
I think democratic centralism was beautiful at the time. Lenin, the party of a new type.
Yeah.
Give your life to the revolution. When the organization makes a decision, you carry out that decision. And that's wonderful.
Right.
But now with the age of the internet and a lot of the groups who have practiced democratic centralism have devolved in these cults around one or two leaders who are
Definitely.
isolated and irrelevant. I'm not sure if democratic centralism works in this time period. And there's definitely not a group out there with enough mass following for me to put that type of energy into. But I think we're making great steps.
Okay.
And Center for Political Innovation is a professional organization. There's membership. People can sign up to be a member, cpiusa.org. And we do a lot of stuff like I do with my show, Working Class Revolt. Right now, next week on Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be finishing our study of Stalin's The Foundations of Leninism.
Okay.
And we're going to have a few guests on. That's good. We usually do one study session and then one information session on Working Class Revolt. I've been doing a series. I've been interviewed quite a few times recently. The interview I did with Caleb Maupin around the trucker protest in Canada, it's had over 4,000 views. And I've had several interviews with different people. I recently spoke with Iranian television.
Okay.
About the economic effects.
Okay.
I was on my friend's Marxist think tank, which is another group that's similar, with a friend who's in China right now, and I talked with them about it. So we're trying to get the message out there to put working class anti-imperialism and make Marxism working class again.
Cool. Now, first, Marxism, what would you say are the essential readings, the most important thing for someone to read who's newly coming into Marxism and coming into this worldview? What would you say what would you usually recommend people to read?
I would read William Z. Foster, The History of Three Internationals.
Okay.
That is, if you go into the documents themselves, they're full of like obscure polemics and journals that you don't really exist anymore. You got to dig really into. But if The History of Three Internationals by William Z. Foster, who's a great American communist, that's not even talked about really much in academia because of his connection with the Soviet Union. It's almost like a study guide. It's like a cheat sheet. It tells you exactly when each document is written, why it was written, and the context of which it was written. And then I think the other one is Stalin, The Foundations of Leninism.
Okay.
The Foundations of Leninism is a great summary on still the way that our world operates, and that's imperialism. Imperialism is monopoly capitalism, where a few, right now at this point, oil bankers control the United States, control the imperialist countries, exploit workers here, and then destroy and maintain the rest of the oppressed nations and keep them in a state of dependence. And if you look at every single political event in our world, that is the source of it, and that you can easily understand why it's going on and not be manipulated.
Right. Interesting. Okay, cool. And are they both on the Marxist Internet Archive? Can you find them online?
I'm not sure. I had to buy. You can definitely find Stalin's Foundation of Leninism. You might have to buy William Z. Foster's History of Three Internationals.
Okay, cool. Interesting. Slight change of subject. What's your take on the current Ukraine crisis?
Yes, so I recently did this. I think a lot of people who are hooked to the Democratic Party don't know the recent history of Russia.
Yeah.
So I have to explain it briefly every time I'm asked this question. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the privatizers came in, took everything that wasn't nailed down, and they went from a relatively stable society to mass poverty and chaos.
They had a huge decline in living standards during that period. Yeah, exactly. They had the lowest, Russia, like in the 90s, had the lowest male life expectancy in the industrialized world, like 56, I believe. It was, I was in Moscow during that period for a time. I taught English there. And it was heartbreaking, like utter poverty. Like half the population was thrown way below, way into the low poverty level overnight. Well, a tiny group of oligarchs and what they call Novi Ruski, new Russians, did really, really well. It was heartbreaking. And like Bill Clinton was saying, like, stay the course, which has led them into absolute catastrophe. But anyway, yeah, now under Putin, they had somewhat of a revival. He protected some of the economy from neoliberal penetration. And, Putin is not a socialist. He's not a Marxist, but like a Russian nationalist. But he did block off some of the country, for some of the economy. Like Lukoil would be a good example. 3 regional oil companies were merged with some private public ownership and stuff. Anyway, there was an economic revival, and Putin is actually fairly popular in Russia, as I understand.
That's exactly the point that I make.
Yeah.
Putin is respected around the world as a great, powerful ally of the anti-imperialist bloc.
Yeah.
And he's rightfully celebrated in Russia for reviving their economy.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
Western imperialists and one of their main representatives, the Democrats, did not like that.
Yeah.
That was taking profits directly out of their hands. So every time they talk about Russia and they claim it's about human rights, it's because they don't like Russia, which they consider outside of the imperialist center. They don't like any competition.
Right.
So that's entirely what it's about. And that's how we got Russiagate, where so-called Trump stole the election. There's no merit to that
nonsense.
whatsoever. And that is why just recently they said that Russia and Putin made a fake tape and were trying to justify make up some kind of false attack to justify invading Ukraine. Russia has no desire at all to invade Ukraine. It's completely against their economic interest. The U.S. media is completely lying about. Yeah. And then you got to go into 2014 under the Obama-Biden regime. You had the neo-Nazi sympathizers government come to power. And then you get into the Minsk Accords, and you have 2 Eastern Ukrainian republics who are ethnic Russians. And if the government in Kiev would get their say, they would ethnically cleanse these people. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting, the people that the United States and NATO are backing. I recently saw some videos from a great comrade. I wish I knew him, but all I do is see his videos. Tejas from Donbass is it a Texan who volunteered with the Russians, and
right.
And he speaks really down home, and he just said, like, these people are putting up a just fight for their lives, and they're stuck on the border between the Russian people who are being attacked. They're being used. Their lives are in danger. They're in the line of attack of the U.S. imperialists against the Russian people and the Russian nation.
Right. And you're right, exactly. And it annoys me so much of the U.S. left claims Russia is imperialist. And I don't see them, like Ben Norton. I have some issues with Ben Norton, but he pointed out that Russia, by material conditions, Russia was forced to adopt the foreign policy of the old Soviet Union. They have an alliance with Cuba, again, revived the alliance. They have an alliance with Venezuela and Bolivia. They're adopting like foreign policy of this. Putin actually tried to integrate with the West, like I remember 07, 08, they bought into the sanctions against Iran or whatever. They tried to play the US game, but the US wouldn't let them, basically. They're almost forced to becoming an anti-imperialist power, which is really interesting. Yeah. So anyway, speaking of which, now change subject again. The Canadian truckers movement. Interesting aside, talk about Ukrainian Nazis. Chrystia Freeland, who's the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, and she's behind much of the crackdown. Her grandfather was a Ukrainian Nazi collaborator, and she adores her grandfather, by the way. And she's a big
Hmm.
liberal hero at this time, but she's close. Apparently, she has some connection with the Azov battalion in Ukraine. So she's basically a woke Nazi, to be blunt. Trudeau, they're Nazis, they're woke Nazis. They're Nazis with a rainbow flag and the correct pronoun, basically. Anyway, so what is your take? You talked about the Freedom Convoy. Would you see it as a working class movement?
Yes, it's essentially a working class movement. I say, like a lot of liberal demonstrations, which the synthetic left does not recognize, are also influenced by big money,
Yeah,
and this is the case here as well. There's big right wing money um, that went into this event. There's right wing organizers,
sure.
but if it was them alone, there's no way they could astroturf their way into the largest convoy in world history. I
Yeah,
mean, there is legitimate grievances. Medical choice is a legitimate grievance, especially with a vaccine
right,
that
right.
did not go through the standard testing. And I think there's a huge misconception that vaccines should be and are the main defense against COVID.
Right, right.
The neoliberal governments, imperialist governments, refused to do adequate testing. They refused to expand medical care. If you look at China's zero COVID policy with adequate testing, they were able to do shorter lockdowns with smaller amounts of the population and get COVID under control even before they had the vaccine.
Right.
And there's been a complete failure. And what it's almost like it's a lot like climate change. The small capital right wing will deny that the problem exists and just let global warming continue. The small capital right wing said COVID didn't exist, don't deal with it, and let's all get the back to work on a pile of dead bodies.
Right.
So you think that the bigger capital, so-called left-wing Democrats, would do something about it? No, their policies are things that do not address the problem, but simply manipulate the crisis to benefit the monopoly capitalist. That is why we had lockdowns that really didn't do any good, except bankrupt the working class, bankrupt small businesses, and grow the monopolies.
Right, right. As I
And,
understand, China also used early treatment, like monoclonal antibodies, fluvoxamine, things like that, which is off the table in most Western countries. Here it's the vaccines and only the vaccines. And if you get COVID, and whether you're vaccinated or not, you get COVID, they put you on a ventilator. And to be really blunt, if you're over 60 and not great health, you wait to die. It's pretty horrible. There's no early treatment. There's no treatment protocol besides the vaccines. Not that I'm not that
mm,
opposed to vaccines, but there's no, it's sort of the way we're dealing, West is dealing with is odd. China at least did use,
no, I mean, yeah.
it's
I mean,
odd
it's
that,
it's obvious it was for profit motive.
yeah,
The testings. Trump didn't take the World Health Organization's test that was being produced in Germany that was cheaper and more effective. They waited until big pharma in the United States had the tests and then bought a less effective test and allowed the country to be overrun with COVID. And then when they could, they put actually billions of dollars. They took billions of dollars and just gave it directly to the pharmaceutical companies.
yeah,
That money could have went into expanding medical care, could have went to those pre-treatments you were talking about. They put it in, and then after they developed the vaccine, they let them keep the patents and then bought the tests from them.
yeah,
So, so and then on the media, they're making it sound like if you criticize big pharma in any way, then you are a right wing racist that wants people to die, and are an anti-vaxxer. It's
right,
absolutely ridiculous.
right. You're a flat earther if you don't completely agree with the narrative, right? It's insane. It's really insane. So, what do you think what should a principal leftist approaching, say, the truckers move in Canada, like I don't live in Canada. I've been there a lot of times. I don't live there, but if socialist lived in, or communists lived in Canada, what would be the right thing to say to the truckers? How does one approach them? I've seen a fair number of live streams about it, and it seems like a cross section of people. I mean, there's a bell curve. Most of the people, the supporters, like there's this one a podcaster, Viva Fry. He's one of the best live streamers of the movement. Max Blumenthal recommended him actually, and so anyway, the protesters, their supporters, average cross section, they're more conservative. They're working class, almost entirely working class. More paid, like see themselves as patriotic Canadians, fairly more religious. As a cross section, they're not right wingers. They're not Nazis that I saw anyway. There was the one Confederate flag, which was understood to be a plant. There were a couple of people with Nazi flags, a couple of idiots. It might have been either plants or idiots trying to hijack the movement. But the overall cross section seemed average working class, slightly more conservative. But how should a communist approach people like that? What would you say to them?
That video with Viva Fry, I believe it was, interviewing the working class elder woman who lost her two sons.
Yeah, that was moving.
Overdose.
I saw that. That was moving. Yeah.
That was very powerful testimony. Yes. And in that, she says, I don't want to live in a communist country.
Yeah.
But then at the end of her rant, she goes, we need a government run by the blue collar workers.
Yeah.
Was the end of her speech.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I thought that the liberal government was communism, I wouldn't very much like the concept of communism either.
Yeah.
I think the Communist Party of Canada is similar to the Communist Party of the United States, has completely dropped the ball. They're dismissing them. They're saying they're petty bourgeois, so they're rich, or the PSL actually called them rich. I'm like, I don't know if you've met any owner operators, but even if they bring in $100,000 or more, they're heavily in debt and they stay out over the road for months at a time, and in a hard lifestyle, and they're the backbone of the economy. So, I mean, this arbitrary dismissal of the drivers as petty bourgeois is absolutely ridiculous by the left. The calling them all races is absolutely ridiculous. I actually saw an interview where I've only seen one picture of a Nazi flag the entire time. And I actually saw an interview where somebody was saying that the dude with the Nazi flag wasn't really waving it, but he was going around asking people, do you want to live in an authoritarian government like the Nazis? He was like using it to say that the liberals were Nazis. He wasn't advocating Nazism. As far as is addressing the people, we already both hate the liberal government. That's a great place to start. I think communists and socialists in the United States should be chanting, let's go Brandon.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a very clever, popular slogan against an authoritarian capitalist imperialist government. Again, and these digital passports as well, I think in the digital technology in the hands of the socialist government like the Chinese, I'm more in favor of, because their interest is actually helping the people and building the economy. But if you look at in the hands of the imperialists, it's absolutely horrible. I mean, this is our enemy, and we're taking money that could be going in to expand Canada's failed healthcare system and expanding the technocrat police state. I mean, it's actually ridiculous. So there's an issue we can get with people. And there's a lot of working class people that showed up, like the one documented by Viva Fry. And I'm a driver, and I live on the road with these folks, and I talk with them. So I think, there's other leftist truck drivers who are believing the lies from CPUSA and PSL, and I think they're in the wrong. We're the ones in the position to talk to these folks. And I look, and there was a lot of good stuff. There was Native Americans dancing. There was children playing in bouncy houses. People playing hockey. People dancing to country music. I mean, honestly, I wish I would have been there. It looked like a really good time.
Looked
I
like
mean, I
fun,
hang
yeah.
out with truckers. Yeah, I hang out with truckers. Some of my best memories are sitting at shops, waiting for my truck to get fixed, and going to bars and hanging out, or sitting in the lounge and swapping old truck stories. I mean, these are fellow workers. I mean, it's just sit there and listen to the issues, and then introduce these class struggle ideas, bring up the property question about how we're being messed over, and then talk about who's doing it, which is the monopoly capitalist, the monopoly capitalist state, and then build organizations, create contacts, and build independent power. I mean, it's not that hard. The problem is we're being twisted by this synthetic left entity that is purposely working on behalf of a section of the ruling class to divide the working class, and the synthetic left is going along with the plan.
Right. It's really sad. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The socialist articles or socialist organizations, I read their articles like the World Socialist website, the IMT, Socialist Alternative. Their takes on this are awful. I think they're just totally rejecting it. It's like they're comparing it to the January 6th in DC. They think they're missing out they're missing out on what it's all about. So you would see the truckers as primarily working class, or even if they are, like, people dismiss them because they're petty bourgeoisie, but I think it's kind of missing the point in some ways.
Yes, I think the synthetic left refuses to recognize the negative role of the professional managerial class.
Right. You mentioned that.
And the ways they're manipulating.
Right.
I think the petty bourgeois can't be the leaders of the working class. It can't lead the broad working class coalition, but it's certainly a part of it. Now, owner operators go from people who own their own trucking company, or so-called owner operator label goes to people that own their own trucking company and rent some of those trucks out and drive one of them, all the way to immigrant dock workers working in international ports who are technically owner operators, but make less money and have less rights than company drivers, but they use that owner operator loophole to take away employment benefits and to avoid labor laws.
Right.
So this is a huge swath of people. And, in the era of hyper monopolization, monopoly capitalism took into its absolute extreme. I honestly think there's a huge opportunity for the oppressed people, working class, small business, and even small and middle portions of the capitalists who are being further pushed down into the proletariat to organize and unite against our common enemy, which it really is this handful of oil bankers at the top.
Right. Right. Interesting. Yeah, I agree. I largely agree. What would you? There's some. Oh yeah. If I talk about you were talking about currency, there's some plans, or some people are talking about central bank digital, moving to central bank digital currency. That could be a little scary. That could be scary because, like, if the state could have control over how you spend your money. Like, oh, we don't like what you posted on social media. You don't get to buy groceries this week. It could be down to that. So it's a little disturbing. There's some theories that maybe, like, the World Economic Forum maybe using COVID as a means to move towards like a techno-feudal system. Max Blumenthal kind of talked about that. He's interviewed several people of that theory. There's a Italian Marxist, Fabio Vigio, has that theory. What do you think? There's anything to this, or do you think it's just hot air?
I haven't looked too far into this subject myself.
Okay.
But it's very telling that the Canadian government and the banks the government works for, I mean, were able to shut down people that were involved in a peaceful demonstration.
Yeah.
They were able to shut, and that's a lot like what they did to the Venezuelan government, and what they're currently doing to the Afghan government.
Right. Freeze their assets.
So we definitely need our own financial institutions. And the Russians may be kicked out of the SWIFT system,
Yeah.
which could hurt the economy, the global economy horribly. We think inflation's bad now. Wait till Russia's completely kicked out of the market. You think gas prices are high now. I think that's an issue I like to bring to people. Like, so regular people, the conservatives are led to hate China more, and the Democrats are led to hate Russia more.
Right.
But further economic warfare, instability, sanctions are a huge part of the inflation. My dad did the calculation for himself, and it's over. He's spending over 30% more on groceries just in the last few months.
Groceries are expensive.
Yeah, people are struggling. The fuel prices are extremely high. I think we need to start having our own localized financial institutions, collectives. We need to start doing mutual aid networks. We need to come together, spot each other. And as times get harder, we're going to have to implement that. And I think the immigrant community in the United States largely does a lot of this stuff already, are masters of mutual aid because of the undocumented status and the horrible economic conditions they're put into. If you look at, there's these horrible racist slogans like, oh, you fit as many Mexicans into a car. But in reality, that's a hard economic condition. And that's mutual aid networks. Carpool is a small form of mutual aid network. And I think the working class and oppressed people have been dealing with the horrible economic conditions for a long time. And when it comes to mutual aid, I don't know if these academic leftists are the ones ready to lead the fight for us. I think we need a movement that's from the masses to the masses, that's organizing the working class itself to build their own institutions and resources and networks to build and fight for their own power.
Right. It's interesting. Right. Now, when you were talking about the professional managerial classes, who do you mean by that?
I don't remember. There was a recent interview with Dan Kovalik and the woman who wrote the book on the professional managerial class.
Okay.
And I saw this. I just learned this topic around the Netflix debate, where the Netflix employees were protesting against, were threatening to go on strike against Dave Chappelle.
Okay.
And Dave Chappelle is a prominent African-American comedian.
Right.
And I've been a fan of him for a long time. And when I watched that special, I didn't see a lot of hate. I didn't see any hate toward the transgender community. I saw an open discussion, some honest questions. And some of those honest questions were about how the national oppression, I'm talking in scientific terms, he didn't say it in that, but the national oppression of Afro-America and Black people is on a material basis is somehow subordinated to these larger woke causes. So then you have these people for these woke causes going on strike, and these people are professional imperialist propagandists for one of the largest monopoly companies in the United States, Netflix. And they're supposed to be on the right, and we're supposed to them when they're trying to cancel a Black man who rose legitimate issues. And I think that was a great case that showed the potential risk of, I believe they're also petty bourgeois. They have petty bourgeois traits, meaning they're not connected to working class. They are our natural allies because, they still work. They're still being pushed on the working class, but they can easily be manipulated into being. That's a lot of this cancel culture stuff is around the professional managerial class. The professional managerial class is being manipulated in a way that attacks anti-imperialists, attacks Black nationalists, and divides the legitimate working class and oppressed movements.
Right. Interesting. Like NPR liberals, essentially. Right. Good take. Interesting. So, Lily, would you see the goal of the radical left to, like, next step, build a revolutionary party, or do you think change will come throughout another way, through like lots of education, or is party building, old style party building, a necessity, or how would you see that?
I think what happens within the revolution, what happens forward, is going to be determined by those willing to struggle.
Right.
I don't know what's going to happen, but what is going to happen is going to be determined by the people doing it. And the people doing it aren't going to be people that, sit in coffee houses and read about it. It's going to be the people who can't stand the conditions anymore and then are looking for alternatives and then try to do something about it. It is the masses that are going to make the history. Now, as far as this, I've been in party builder organizations and they have done great work. I think democratic centralism is a good tool under the right circumstances and carried out effectively. All I got to say to people is we need to build organizations that aren't connected to the imperialist left or aren't connected to the imperialist system. We need independent organizations that generate our own thoughts and then take political action for the communities themselves.
Right. Makes sense. So it'll come in the process. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the near future?
That's a good question. I think it's our duty, our revolutionary duty, to be to practice revolutionary optimism.
Yeah.
If you get into a pit of despair, you ain't going to be no good for nobody. And why be mad and sad about stuff you cannot control? I think there is huge opportunities for solidarity building, for coalition building, as conditions worsen and people look for an alternative, and the police comes down on us harder. There's more opportunity for revolution than ever before. And I think some of the great revolutionaries, the Panthers, going back to the 40s, they would have killed to be in our shoes. I honestly think we're on the precipice. If we organize correctly, if we get people together, if we build power, we're in a decaying system and things can change very quickly, for the worse. And we need to start putting the groundwork now. And I think some of them people back in the day would kill to be in our shoes right now.
Yeah, we're approaching an interesting time, it seems like. Yeah, interesting. The repression I've been following live streamers, and the repression against the truckers movement in Ottawa and elsewhere is real. I was watching it last night. Police were beating this elderly woman. They were kittling people, pushing people. And these people are basically kind of more or less conservative working class people. They're understanding they're coming to force to understand what the system is. Like fascism is liberal capitalism with its clothes off, basically. They're a rude awakening. It's really interesting. It's scary, but it's interesting. I think you're right. It's an interesting time to be alive. Finally, the CPI, Center for Political Innovation, is that in New York based, or they have branches in other parts of the country?
There's branch in New York, branch in Chicago,
Okay.
Philly organization down in Texas. In March, we're having a big meeting in Austin. A lot going on.
Okay, cool. And finally, is there, because I got to go soon, my dogs are getting restless. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to finish up on that note about repression. I
Sure.
saw a video of a woman being trampled
Yeah.
by a mounted policeman.
Yeah.
This
I saw
is
that.
people are coming up, working people, people that put 100 hours driving over the road, to make a living, to send money back to struggling communities, are starting to realize that the monopoly capitalist imperialist government is their enemy. It's not their friend. And they're becoming radicalized, and if we're not out there bringing up class struggle, bringing up you black and white unite and fight, there's some other people that got some other ideas that
Yeah.
aren't as good.
Yeah. That's a scary part, yeah.
Particularly, it's not going to go well. So, folks can follow me. Just Google Dust James Anti-Imperialist America, and you can join in the YouTube conversations. I think that's about it.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you spending time. Sorry, I have a few technical screw ups, but I appreciate you spending the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye. Have a good night.